Hello and welcome to The Menu, Monocle Radio's food and drink programme. I'm your host, Chiara Rimella. Coming up on this week's show, food writer Georgina Hayden joins us in the studio to delve into the Mediterranean delights in her new book, Greekish.
I very much, when I'm in Cyprus and I love my granny's cooking still and my mum's cooking, but also I've grown up with this very Western palate. So things change and alter along the way, and that's how I cook now.
As Art Basel takes over the Swiss city, we check in with a local company exploring the frontiers of brewing.
When it comes to reusing spontaneous yeast from wine barrels, I never saw that. Hybrids with grapes, I saw it sometimes, but not with the yeast.
And we take a closer look at a British brand making spirits sustainable. All that here on The Menu on Monocle Radio. As summer beckons in the Northern Hemisphere, memories of meals by the seaside at a trattoria or taverna might entice you to recreate the light, zesty meals typical of a Mediterranean holiday back at home. Georgina Hayden's new book, Greekish, will certainly come in handy. A cook, stylist and award-winning food writer based in London, Hayden grew up above her grandparents' Greek Cypriot taverna in Tufnell Park, where she developed a love of cooking from the recipes passed down to her. Georgina's latest book collects together recipes inspired by her Greek Cypriot roots and travel, but without orthodoxies. She joined me in the studio to talk about it. Georgina, thank you so much for joining me in the studio today. It's such a joy to have you here to talk about this most sunny of books. And I love the title. You've obviously written about the food of your heritage before, but I'm really interested in your choice of title. The book is called Greekish.
Yeah.
And the first question is, what's ish about it?
Do you know what when you write a book, you often come up with the concept first and the title comes later. And the title doesn't always come easily to me. Sometimes, it takes a bit of work and whatever. But when this title, it took, halfway through the process of the book and it hit me and I said, that's it. And I would not be moved. And actually, thankfully, my publishers were on board. But I was like, this is the title, we are going with it. Because I think on so many levels it works. I would say that I'm Greek-ish. I mean, my parents are from Cyprus, they're Greek Cypriot. Most of my family are still over there. But, I'm born and raised in London. So I very much feel, I feel like there's a lot of food writers at the moment that are talking about first and second generational cooking. And I think that's a really interesting voice to have. I very much, when I'm in Cyprus and I love my granny's cooking still and my mum's cooking, but also I've grown up with this very Western palate. So things change and alter along the way. And that's how I cook now. I can do the traditional, I can do the moussaka, I can do the keftedes, but actually I change things along the way because that's my reality as a Londoner, as a working mum. And so I would say I'm Greek-ish. I would call my girls, they're half Cypriot, they're half English-Irish. But also I think it comes with that thing of playfulness. I'm from Cyprus and it's this divided island, and then you have Greece with its thousands of islands and this very sprawling, coastline. And actually there's so much movement with all the cuisines. Like you make something and then someone will be like, that's not Greek, that's from this country. And that's with all countries. People have travelled forever and things have moved and changed. And I just think for me, this book is less about tradition, less about authenticity and more about me and what I cook. And that's why there's the ish, there's the playfulness to it.
Speaking of this, I suppose, how much did you give yourself license to stray from the classics? There are times in the book where you bring up the big names that we're all familiar with, the spanakopita and the baklava. How much license did you take? And also, where did you want to just hit it and just deliver the best possible version of that classic that you might want to make?
I think your last bit there was exactly it for me. I think, listen, you can, if you've done the due diligence, if you've either got the heritage or you've done the research or, you've spent enough time somewhere, then, you can be playful with it because you have a license to. And I've got nothing against anyone who wants to take a pasticcio and add a Southeast Asian ingredient to it or whatever. And for example, I'd say like a food writer like Gurdeep Loyal is very good at doing things like that. He's a second generational, Indian descent food writer, and he has a lot of playfulness with his dishes, and he will mishmash cuisines. That's not my style of cooking so much. And I love his food and I love things like that. But for me, with the Greek food, I think it's a bit like what you said at the end. I wanted to make almost the best versions, but just the way I cook now. I love, love, love spanakopita, okay? I think it's one of the best things ever. And in my second book, Taverna, I've got a recipe that I stand by it. I think it's really decent. I think it's great. People like it. I don't need to do that again. I've written it. Done. I haven't changed the way I make it, but in Greekish, because the emphasis for me is really everyday, easy, accessible cooking, I'm not making a spanakopita at 6 o'clock on a Tuesday night. Do you know what I mean? I haven't got the time. So what I do is I make things spanakopita-ish. So that's when the ish comes back. I'll make jacket potatoes. I've got 2 young kids. They love a jacket potato. I'm getting that potato filling. I'm mixing in the cheese. I'm mixing the spinach. So you've got all the flavour profiles, but you're doing it in an accessible, slightly more fun way. So I wouldn't say I'm sort of doing any fusion style cooking. It's just more about taking the famous flavours like baklava or spanakopita, pasticcio, and making them just more accessible.
This idea of simplifying things is something that you come back to in the book time and again. And there's also something that you say, which I think is really interesting, which there is this slight stereotype of Greek food that sees it as very basic, very simple. And so people might think, it's very simple already. How complicated can it be to cook Greek food? I mean, I'm an Italian sitting around a table, and there's clearly a lot of Mediterranean competition between the respective culinary traditions.
Yep.
Specifically, Italians believe, I'm going to take myself out of this equation. I'm a very neutral bystander here. They believe that their version is kind of more complicated,
of course,
than the Greek. But I suppose, can you talk to us about why the stereotype is not correct? And I suppose, how can you simplify something even when it is made of just a few basic ingredients, but the processes might be complicated?
So I think there's 2 things here. I think you have a few types with Greek food and Italian as well, for sure. You have either the really slow-cooked, laborious dishes, things like, for example, pasticcio, which is what many people would refer to as a Greek-style lasagna. It's a slow-cooked ragu, it's pasta mixed together, and then you make a white sauce, bechamel, layer it on top, grated cheese, and then you bake it in the oven. You've got 4 vessels there. You've got your pan for the meat, your pan for the pasta, your pan for the white sauce, your pan that you're baking it in. That is weekend cooking. Okay, it's not challenging. I wouldn't say that's a difficult dish to make, but it's a dedication. And so one of the first recipes I wrote was my 1-pan pasticcio. I love a pasticcio. I think it's comfort, it's delicious. But also, I don't want to spend 5 hours on it. So the idea, for example, with that recipe was to make the mince mixture in a really deep, wide pan and then to cook the pasta directly in it. Straight away, you've got rid of 1 pan. Then instead of making a white sauce, I just do a real cheats version, which is mixed together creme fraiche, egg yolks and lots of grated cheese. And then you spoon that over the top and pop it under the grill. You've got rid of 2 more pans. So that is I think that's a good example of what I'm trying to achieve. So in Greek food, you have those dishes, the glef de go. They're not hard. They don't have many ingredients, but I think because of what life was like 100 years ago, not even that, 50 years ago, people had time. And we don't have that. That is the thing we all want more of now. So it's about getting those flavours, but in a sort of more, an easier way. There is a chapter in the book for sort of weekend cooking, which are your lower and slower cooks. But I think the biggest chapter in the book is the weeknights, and it's achieving those flavours and those memories, but in a sort of easier way.
A word that I always pick up on whenever it's mentioned in a book is feast, because I love the idea that it conjures up this image of abundance and conviviality. Do you think that's inbuilt in the way that Greeks and Cypriots approach food, and is it inbuilt in the way that you approach food?
Yeah, 100%. And I don't think I realised that for a long time, because it was my reality, and not just through my family, but through the restaurant. If you come to my house, it doesn't matter if you've just turned up and announced, I will lay out a spread. Even if I tell you there's no food in the house, there is a feast. I can just still whip up this, that and the other. There's always food. And even on a regular Tuesday night, I would go to my grand's house after school and I would have something as one of my favourite Greek dishes is called fagi. Well, In Greek, it's called phages. In Cyprus, we call it phagi. It's just a slight dialect thing. And it's a big pan of lentils, slow-cooked onions, lentils, rice. It's really, really comforting. You know, imagine like a Cypriot dal, basically. One of my very favourite things. So my yaya would have a big pot of phagi. But it's never just a pot of phagi because that costs pennies to make, right? So that would be on the table, on her little table in her kitchen with a plastic tablecloth. There would be fresh bread. There would be a bowl of olives. There would be some dashi, some tahini. There would be some pickled caper leaves. There would always be a salad. And that's also mind-blowing. People think, what do you mean you're having a salad with a hot dish? Doesn't matter. On the plate, you've got your phagi. There's always a village salad. And a one-pan dish suddenly becomes a feast. You know, if someone came round, they'd be like, oh, is it a celebration? You know, it's not. It's just cheap, everyday food. But we cannot there has to be many dishes. And the other thing I would say as well about, you know, Cypriot and Greek food is we never really serve things piping hot. You know, everything has been made and sat, and then it becomes this very relaxed affair. You know, I'm married to an Englishman. He's from the north of England. And it blows my mind that they want their plates warmed and things. And my mother-in-law's like, oh, if it's not hot. And I'm like, babes, it's so different. Like, if you know what it's like, you serve a lasagna straight from the oven. It's a terrible idea. Leave it at least 40 minutes for it to have a minute and settle. And Greek food's the same. So everything's much more relaxed. There's lots of plates and it's much more social.
That was Georgina Hayden. Greekish is published by Bloomsbury and available now. You're listening to The Menu. Most of the art aficionados that are in Basel this week for Art Basel, the world's preeminent art fair, will probably cheers to deals with fine wine. But for those who are after a different kind of tipple whilst perusing the exhibitions around the city, it's worth stopping off at Wet. Despite their very different day jobs, old friends Tobias Nussbaumer and Michael Ruch are united in their love of brewing and this passion project. The two spend most of their time working as an artist, that's Tobias, or in IT consultancy, Michael's vocation. Tucked away behind Basel's main train station, Wet is a small, perfectly formed bottle shop. It's known for its fantastic selection of drinks and the founder's unique brewing style, which blends the flavours and processes of wine and beer. Monocle's Sophie Monaghan-Coombs went along to find out more. Here's Michael on how the duo's collaboration started.
I mean, it has been a thing that has been coming for a while, so I was always interested in cooking and, you know, watching a lot of videos and reading books, trying to figure out how stuff works and how you can perfect things. And I think we always like to get together with, beers and rap music. That was our pastime thing. And and
cooking.
and cooking, obviously. And then when this wave of like New England IPAs got popular in Europe and a lot of British breweries started perfecting the styles, I was super interested in, learning about it. How does this work? And how can we do this at home, or is it impossible? And we started buying a small kit and working on it. And, it's as with everything. The first 80% are quite easy, but then getting a really good product takes some years and practice. And then also developing your own style takes a very long time.
Could you tell me a little bit more about the product that you're developing and also what you're selling here as well that hasn't come from you?
Mm-hmm. Our main focus when it comes to beer is New England style IPAs, because it's existing here, but there is much more work to do, I guess. And since we are super interested, we try to focus on that, to develop or come up with a good regional product which reflects that style. And the other main beer style that we're interested in is wild ale. And since we have a connection to wineries and access to big knowledge there, and also grapes and yeasts that are leftovers in barrels of our friend Silas from Weingut Rien, empties his barrels and pumps out his wine after at least 2 years, let's say. The leftover is a big load of yeast, which has a lot of flavor, a lot of potential, and also like sediments that have a lot of flavor of the wine and a little bit of wine in between. We collect that and use it to start our own brews or yeah, that's the yeast that re-ferments or ferments our beers. And so it really has some wine qualities because there are tannins left in the sediments I mentioned, and also pigments that colors our beers. When it's a Pinot Noir, it's getting this reddish appearance and also the flavor of a Pinot Noir, but also it's a beer. So yeah, it gets us excited, and we're up for experiments.
Yeah. And I think it's very cool because it doesn't only create a unique product, which, we're still working out how we can control this thing. And it's also cool that it's a bit uncontrolled, but it's also, a bit the sustainability aspect that it's something the winemakers would throw out. And we can make something new with it that then, we found out all the winemakers actually also love to drink beer. So everyone benefits from it and is happy about it. Yeah.
And could you tell me a little bit more about kind of how innovative that is? How many people are doing that sort of hybrid beer wine? And also a little bit about maybe the process of experimenting to reach a product that tastes really good and works really well.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, nothing is really new, right? We're not inventing everything from scratch. There are a lot of things, like, in Belgium, they use grapes since a long time to work on their beers. However, I think when it comes to this new modern style of beer, these New England IPAs incorporating this is quite unique. I have not come across this. And yeah, but ultimately, every grape, every area is different. So it's kind of cool that it does also, in that way, in the flavor, represent where we're from and, products that we're proud of. Yeah.
Yeah, and there comes a certain terroir aspect to the beer, which is not everyone is speaking about terroir when it comes about wine. And in beer, yeah, maybe nowadays it's really a little bit coming where people are comparing hops, but from different regions, but it's not really existing. And since yeast has a big aspect has the responsibility for a lot of flavors, either in beer or wine, it's really also a bit to focus on yeast and its qualities. And yeah, I mean, when it comes to reusing spontaneous yeast from wine barrels, I never saw that. But hybrids with grapes, I saw it sometimes. In every country, there are 1 or 2 breweries and experimenting with that, but not with the yeast that comes spontaneously from the vineyard and really reflects the very terroir there.
And maybe just to kind of build off that, we're at your shop in Basel, and I wonder how your company is sort of a product of this region, how you use lots of kind of regional wines, and how, why Basel is sort of the right place for you to be for lots of different reasons, I guess, both for the kind of sourcing and also selling as well.
Yeah, interesting question. I mean, ultimately, it's the right place for us because we were both born here and we live here. And I guess it was always, we both like to travel and explore places and find stuff that excites us somewhere else. And it was always the ambition to, create something that can stand up to that and that we can be proud of and that people want to come visit that we have here. Yeah, and I think that is a big motivation, at least for me, to do something that is not just nice, and it's nice because it's local, but it really, is unique in its way and also has a bit of a representation of where you're from.
You mentioned you're an artist as your day job and you are an IT consultant. So very different things that you're doing day to day, and then you're coming together to do this. How does that kind of shape what you're doing? How is that a benefit? How does it kind of work with those very different sort of backgrounds and day jobs?
Mm-hmm. I mean, for me, the answer is quite simple. I spend my days in front of PowerPoint and Excel and doing presentations and trying to figure things out for big international companies, and to do something with my hands other than that gives me a lot of inspiration and strength, and also just refocus to do that. And I think it both balances out. It was something I always seeked. Like, I used to do a lot of music during my youth years, and that was sort of my balance, and now it's more this. And I really enjoy it. And to create something together is just fantastic, I think. Yeah.
Time now for the week's food and drink headlines. Here's Monocle's George Ruskin.
Buldak spicy noodles from South Korea have been recalled in Denmark after at least 10 people reported vomiting and abdominal pain after consuming the product. Danish authorities found the capsaicin levels were high enough to cause poisoning, especially among children. The company has said that it is reviewing Danish regulations, emphasising that the spiciness of their products is clearly indicated on the packaging. The state of New York has passed the Restaurant Reservation Anti-Piracy Act, requiring third-party services like Resy and OpenTable to get written permission from restaurants before booking reservations. It becomes the first US state to legislate against predatory reservation practices, such as reselling reservations and making fake bookings. The bill was supported by the restaurant industry and aims to protect both diners and restaurants from fraudulent activities and improve the dining experience. A Zurich hotel is facing backlash for charging £1 or just over €1 for a special ice cube engraved with their logo. The hotel has defended the price, saying it reflects the craftsmanship that goes into each frosty orb and the fact that they melt more slowly than regular ice cubes, but many find the charge excessive. Despite the criticism of the ice cubes online, the hotel is banking on tourists and well-heeled locals willing to pay for the novelty. Those are the week's food and drink headlines. Now back to Chiara.
The whole food and drinks industry is being swept by a call to make farming, production and distribution more sustainable, and that extends also to spirits, a sector where this need for ecological transition often wasn't quite as prominent. Ed Faulkner and Ivo Devereux started Sapling Spirits to fill a gap in the market for sustainable drinks. Sapling is the UK's first climate-positive spirits brand. Their vodka and gin range is distilled from 100% British wheat, and for every bottle sold, a tree is planted. We spoke to Ivo to discuss production, partnerships, and what's next for the company.
The brand really started actually because of a tree planting music festival that we set up. And it's quite a long story, so I'll give you the slightly shorter version of it. So essentially I set this up with my business partner, a guy called Ed, and we both really wanted to set up a company together. And we didn't know exactly what that was going to be, but we knew that sustainability and kind of the food and drink space were two elements that we were both quite interested in. I was working in the music business at the time, so I was working for a company called Blue Raincoat Music, and I was at the same time setting up some kind of university nights and things like that. So events and music festivals and these types of things quite interested me. And Ed was working for a craft food and drink distributor. And at the time, we were both, I guess, just a bit bored of doing the same things with our mates every weekend and going to the pub and having the same sort of types of conversations. And we were looking for something new and interesting to dig our teeth into. And we really simultaneously wanted to have a kind of positive impact on the planet. And the thing that we found through our research, bearing in mind we were sort of 21, 22 at the time, the thing that we found through our research that we felt had a really positive impact, but also was something that we could find quite enjoyable to do, was tree planting. So we initially kind of used it as a bit of an excuse actually to go to these weird and wonderful places, and we found a charity in the Atlas Mountains called the High Atlas Foundation, and we started planting trees with them and saw this immense impact that the High Atlas Foundation was having on the local communities in that area. And so we started getting involved in some more projects, and we then found a project just off the west coast of Scotland where there'd been a government grant to plant about 250,000 trees. They had been planted, and then there was a guy who was living there at the time, and he started burning his rubbish and forgot about it, and essentially this massive forest fire happened and it wiped out about 250,000 trees. Wow. And so we were then on this second project trying to replant this essentially kind of miniature forest that had been planted the year before. But this time we didn't have the government grant backing because they weren't going to do it again. And so we were really tasked at the time with trying to get more people involved in the project who were willing to give up their time to come and plant these trees. And we found very quickly that when we were asking people to come and join us and take time off work to essentially stand in the rain and plant trees, they were telling us to go away, basically, and in slightly less polite terms. And so we decided we had to kind of come up with an incentive and a reason to get people interested in this tree planting project. And so we decided to turn it into a tree planting music festival. And we kind of mixed in both Ed's kind of love for food and drink and my love for music and events, and put that together. And essentially it was a kind of tree planting party where we'd get these guys to plant trees in the daytime, and we then in return put on DJ'd music. We built a cocktail bar and gave them free drinks in the evening, and it was a kind of quid pro quo in a sense that if you come and help us, we'll give you a good time in the evening. And while setting this event up, couldn't find a spirits brand that we felt aligned with the mission of the music festival. You know, there were lots of companies that talked about sustainability or had a little asterisk on their website, but when you really looked into it, there wasn't a brand that really existed for that reason in the first place. And so that, I guess, was the kind of eureka moment, I guess, is how they describe it, when we thought, let's actually quit our jobs and set up a brand ourselves that really exists from the ground up as a purpose-driven brand. It's not just a value-add piece. And so we literally started mashing up some potatoes and making some vodka in the back of Ed's shed in Peckham, and then about a year later developed what is now an award-winning, delicious vodka, and then gin. So it's no longer a potato vodka, it's a wheat-based vodka. Wheat-based vodkas generally, we find, a little bit smoother and have a slightly sweeter kind of end to it, and that was the kind of flavour profile that we were going for. So yeah, as I said, the first batch actually kind of came out luminous blue, so it's come on a long way since then. It took us about a year to a year and a half to develop what is the liquid today. And so the way you make vodka is essentially you can make it from anything that creates starch. So typically, you know, people think of vodka as a potato base. You can make it with grapes. I mean, anything that creates starch. So rye, wheat, obviously in the case of sapling. And depending on what base ingredient you use, it will make a difference to the kind of mouthfeel and the texture and the flavour profile. So yeah, lots of people think sapling is quite similar to Grey Goose because we're both wheat vodkas.
And in terms of sustainability, is that more of a choice that you've... I mean, also, again, it's like to do with the flavour, but would you say that choosing wheat over potato, is there any difference in terms of how that affects...
To a degree. So a big part of our kind of sustainability agenda is about using local ingredients. And so the wheat farms that we use are quite close to our London distillery. So that was part of the decision-making process. But so, yeah, I guess there was a degree of that as well.
What do you kind of envision for the brand going into the next few years? Are you kind of... I mean, obviously, it's finding new spots to plant your trees, right? And, yeah, what's your plan?
Yeah, so I mean, so the tree planting aspect to our business actually isn't about offsetting. So obviously I can see why lots of people would think it is, because typically tree planting is used as an offset. But sapling spirits is actually already carbon neutral before we ever plant a tree. So we're all about actually reducing emissions from in the first place. And then whatever there is left, we actually do offset via nature-based offsets and an official carbon accounting partner. And then the trees that we plant for every bottle that we sell are all in addition to that carbon neutrality. And we've planted about 260,000 trees now with a mission to plant 1 million by 2027. So I guess the kind of long-term objective is to reach that goal of 1 million trees by 2027. But
do you think you're on track for that?
So of those 260,000, we planted about 150,000 in the last year. So it's kind of definitely growing in the right direction.
So obviously you've teamed up with the Fish Hotel in the Cotswolds. And how has this partnership allowed you to sort of expand your brand awareness?
Yeah, I mean, we really love partnering with hotel estates. I think there's many reasons why. I mean, one is it's a great opportunity for us to find some land that we can actually plant some trees on. But, you know, we've worked with Farncombe Estate now for a couple of years, and they're really great partners of ours. We've been house vodka and gin with them for a while. And I guess for us, it's really about association. So the types of people that are buying sapling in the supermarket are often the types of people that are really interested in food, really interested in what they're drinking, and really care about what they're consuming. And I guess places like the Farncombe Estate have a demographic of people that are actually interested in the food and drink they're going to be consuming when they're there, and also the sustainability agenda of the place that they're going. So I think the Farncombe Estate are investing heavily in sourcing environmentally conscious electricity to their estate, and, you know, through solar panels really is what they're doing. And these types of initiatives can only really be put in place by the types of places like Farncombe and other hotel estates. And so being associated with companies that are also similarly conscious of their eco footprint.
So what would you say kind of are the biggest challenges you face as a British brand? I think you've kind of touched on that a little bit, but in terms of growing the wheat, kind of bringing it to bottle, what are kind of the biggest hurdles you've come across?
Yeah, well, I guess the biggest challenge for us as a company really is just the sheer scale of competition in the UK. You know, for every small brand like Sapling, there's quite a few absolutely massive conglomerates that have got ginormous budgets and big portfolios of drinks. So not only have they got these ginormous budgets, but they've got the distribution in place, and then they've got these massive portfolios. So they can put together these deals, which essentially mean that for up-and-coming small brands like ours, they, one, price you out, and two, put contracts in place that mean that the big high-volume opportunities are mostly taken up. So that does make it quite tricky for small brands to come and compete. Having said that, I think, in terms of business, the UK is obviously a massive market. So we're very, very lucky to have started the brand here in one of the biggest markets in the world for drinking booze. So in that sense, it's been great starting here. So there's definitely been some ups and downs, some hard bits and some bits that have made it easier for sure. We have two different refill schemes set up. So we've got one that's direct to consumer through our website and on Ocado, where you can buy a bottle and then you can buy a 70cl refill pouch that you can then use to refill your bottle at home. And that's a fully circular system. So once you finish that pouch, you don't have to buy a stamp or anything like that. You can just put it in the post box and it'll come straight back for recycling and reuse, which is quite a neat kind of easier way to recycle.
That was Monocle's Emily Wade speaking to Ed Faulkner and Ivo Devereux from Sapling Spirits. And that's all for this week's edition of The Menu. I'm Chiara Rimella. This programme was produced by Henry Rees Sheridan. Our sound engineers were Mariella Bevan and Tamsin Howard. We'll be back next Friday, but make sure to catch our sister show Food Neighbourhoods, which is out on Tuesday. Thanks for listening, and until next week.